What if everything you are taught about the final words of Jesus is incomplete or even intentionally distorted? What if a single moment on the cross, a final whisper carried by the wind, contained a secret capable of breaking the invisible chains that still bind humanity today? And what if those last 3 words were never meant to be understood literally, but spiritually, a coded message capable of exposing the Archons, the rulers of illusion described in the Gnostic texts? For centuries, you may have heard one specific version of Jesus' last moments, a simple phrase repeated from pulpits to classrooms. But ancient manuscripts, hidden traditions, and Gnostic interpretations suggest something far more mysterious. They hint that Jesus did not merely declare an ending, but reveal the path, a key, a spiritual command that the powers of this world, both earthly and unseen, wanted buried. Why? Because if you understand what those 3 words truly meant, then the veil woven by the Archons begins to crack. And the Archons, as the Gnostics said, survive only through ignorance. Before we continue, ask yourself something. Has any moment in your life felt like a quiet whisper telling you that the world is not as it seems? That there is a truth the system doesn't want you to question? And if so, what do you believe Jesus really intended to leave behind in his final breath? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective may unlock something powerful for someone else watching right now. In this video, we will walk step by step through ancient writings, forbidden gospels, and hidden symbols to uncover what might truly be the last 3 words of Jesus before he died, and why they terrified the Archons. But first, make sure you subscribe to the channel and stay with us until the final block, because the revelation hidden here has been forgotten for almost 2,000 years, and today you will finally understand why. For almost 2,000 years, the world has repeated the same version of Jesus' final words, as if they were set in stone, unquestionable and complete. Yet when we look closer, we discover something unsettling. Ancient manuscripts don't fully agree on what Jesus said. Some have missing lines, others have strange variations, and certain gospels that once circulated among the early followers of Christ were later labeled heretical and locked away from the eyes of believers. Why would such diverse testimonies exist about the most important moment in Christian history? And more importantly, who decided which version would survive? This is the first sign that something was altered. The Gnostics believed this editing of truth was not accidental. It was guided by invisible forces that benefited when humanity stayed in spiritual darkness. To understand the magnitude of this problem, imagine being told that the final message of Jesus, the last thing he ever said, was simplified, shortened, or even replaced to avoid revealing a deeper power. Imagine that the church, seeking unity and authority, selected one narrative while discarding others that hinted at a direct connection between human souls and the divine source. The Gnostics claimed that such omissions were not merely theological decisions. They were strategies. They believed the Archons, the gatekeepers of the material world, influenced those in power to hide any teaching that could help humans wake up from the illusion. According to Gnostic texts like the Apocryphon of John and the Gospel of Thomas, knowledge, gnosis, is liberation. Therefore, anything Jesus said that revealed the true nature of the soul, the false nature of the Archons, or the path to inner freedom was considered dangerous. Ask yourself honestly, how much of what you were taught came from Jesus, and how much came from centuries of human institutions choosing what fit their agenda? What makes this even more mysterious is that some early Christian communities insisted that Jesus shared a final spiritual formula with his followers, not a public proclamation, but a coded message meant to be understood only by those who could perceive the truth beneath the surface. These groups believed that Jesus' mission was not simply to die for humanity, but to awaken it. And awakening requires knowledge, clarity, and inner vision. If Jesus did speak 3 final words, as some scholars suggest, then those words may have been a deliberate key, a synthesis of his entire spiritual mission, condensed into a single breath. But keys are dangerous to those who guard prison doors. So the Archons, through fear, misinformation, and religious authority, ensured that the deeper meaning of his words was either quieted or replaced with interpretations that kept humanity obedient, blind, and spiritually dependent. At this point, the question becomes unavoidable. If Jesus' final words were so important, why don't we hear them discussed in depth? Why isn't there a universal agreement? And why do the earliest manuscripts contain so many inconsistencies? Could it be that the truth was never lost, only hidden in plain sight? Some researchers believe that if you carefully read the Gnostic Gospels, you find subtle clues, fragments, symbols, and metaphors that point toward a revelation concealed beneath layers of doctrine. They suggest that Jesus' final message was not meant to confirm the power of this world, but to break it. And that is exactly what the Archons feared, a humanity capable of remembering its spiritual origin. Before moving on, reflect on this. Do you believe the version of Jesus you were taught is complete? Or do you feel deep inside that something enormous has been left out, something that could change how you see life, death, and the divine itself? Write your thoughts in the comments, because this is more than just information. This is the beginning of uncovering a secret buried for centuries. When we look beyond the traditional Bible and step into the library of early Christianity, we find something astonishing. Dozens of ancient writings, discovered in Egypt, Syria, and the Middle East, describing teachings of Jesus that were never included in the official canon. These texts, such as the Gospel of Thomas, the Gospel of Mary, the Dialogue of the Savior, and especially the codices found in Nag Hammadi, do not contradict Jesus. Instead, they reveal a deeper dimension of his message, a dimension focused not on external obedience, but on inner awakening. Many scholars believe these writings survived because certain communities, often persecuted and forced underground, protected them from destruction. And inside these texts, we find hints that Jesus communicated final truths that only a few were prepared to understand. If Jesus spoke 3 final words, meant as a key for liberation, the clues to them would logically be scattered across the teachings that survived outside the official version. And indeed, we find unusual phrases hidden in these writings, phrases that whisper about freedom from the Archons, victory over the material world, and the remembrance of one's true origin. In the Gospel of Thomas, Jesus repeatedly tells his disciples that the kingdom is not something to wait for, but something to discover within. He tells them that those who truly understand his words will not taste death. This is not about physical immortality. It is about breaking the cycle of illusion and returning to the source beyond the reach of the Archons. If his final message contained a similar emphasis on inner liberation, then the early church, influenced by political and social pressures, may have avoided promoting such ideas because they weakened institutional control. The church wanted unity, structure, and obedience. But Jesus' Gnostic teachings encouraged personal revelation, personal responsibility, and personal connection to the divine spark. Imagine how different the world would be if, instead of waiting for salvation, millions of people understood that the divine was already inside them. This shift alone would threaten any system that depended on external authority. Other texts, like the Gospel of Mary, describe Jesus teaching his closest followers, especially Mary Magdalene, that true salvation comes from dissolving fear and ignorance. In this Gospel, Jesus reveals that the soul can ascend through the realms controlled by the Archons only when it remembers its true nature. This idea of remembrance appears again and again in Gnostic writings. It suggests that Jesus' mission was not only about sacrifice, but about reminding humanity of something forgotten long ago. Could his final 3 words have been a powerful command to remember? A call to awaken from the illusion crafted by the rulers of this world? The Nag Hammadi texts go even further. In the Apocryphon of John, Jesus appears after the resurrection to reveal the architecture of the universe, the divine source, the creation of the demiurge, and the 7 archons who maintain the material realm. This was not mythology for entertainment. It was a map. A map showing that humans carry a spark from the divine realm, a spark trapped within a body shaped by the demiurge. According to these teachings, knowledge of this truth is the first step toward liberation. Now imagine Jesus, knowing he had only moments left, choosing 3 words that summarized this entire cosmic structure. 3 words that would remind every soul of its divine origin and expose the illusion maintained by the Archons. Some scholars propose that the earliest Christian communities treated Jesus' final words as a symbolic formula, not as a literal sentence. They interpreted it as a spiritual key that would open the inner gate to the higher realms. Others believe the original phrase was replaced with interpretations that aligned better with Roman and later medieval theology. Whatever the case, the pattern is clear. The more we study ancient texts, the more we realize that Jesus' message was far more transformative than the simplified version most people were taught. Now ask yourself, if Jesus' final words held the power to break the Archons' control, would that message be allowed to survive untouched? Would the forces that benefit from spiritual ignorance simply leave it in plain sight? Or would they quietly replace it, bury it, or reinterpret it until the original meaning was forgotten? Share in the comments what you think these hidden texts are trying to reveal. Your insight might help piece together the truth. To understand what Jesus may have truly whispered in his final breath, we must first understand the battlefield he described, a battlefield not of swords or empires, but of consciousness. The Gnostics taught that humanity lives inside a layered illusion shaped by the Archons, powerful forces that control perception, emotion, and thought. They are not demons in the traditional sense. They are cosmic rulers who maintain the boundaries of the material world. In the Gnostic texts, the Archons keep humans distracted, fearful, obedient, and spiritually asleep. According to these teachings, Jesus came specifically to reveal the existence of this invisible imprisonment and to show the way out. If his last 3 words carried a hidden instruction, then those words had to point directly to liberation, a way to break through the Archons' influence and remember the divine light within. In many ancient writings, Jesus uses symbols to teach truths that could not be explained openly. Light, for example, is not simply illumination, but the presence of divine consciousness. Blindness is not about physical sight, but about ignorance. The kingdom of God is not a place, but a state of awakening. When the Gnostics speak of remembrance, they are referring to the soul recognizing its true origin beyond the material world. This symbolic language appears repeatedly in the texts the Church later removed or silenced. And if Jesus consistently used symbols to express profound ideas, then his last words might have been symbolic as well. A phrase that appears simple, but carries layers of meaning unlocked only by those who seek deeper truth. Ask yourself, what if the power of those words was never literal, but vibrational, a coded formula embedded with spiritual intention? The Archons, as described in the Hypostasis of the Archons and the Apocryphon of John, thrive on forgetfulness. Their control depends on humans forgetting their divine spark, forgetting their connection to the source, forgetting that they were not created by the demiurge, but by a higher, infinite consciousness. This is why many Gnostic groups believed Jesus came to remind humanity of something they once knew but had lost. His message was a call to awaken, to remember, to see through the illusion. Now imagine the fear this would have caused among those who benefited from keeping humanity spiritually dependent. A message that empowers the individual is dangerous. A message that exposes the Archons is threatening. A message that breaks fear is revolutionary. If his last 3 words were designed to shatter illusion, then the forces of the world, both physical and spiritual, would have done everything possible to obscure them. This leads to a striking observation. Earlier Christian writings, especially those closer to Jesus' lifetime, emphasize personal transformation, inner discovery, and direct connection to the divine. But as centuries passed, the language shifted toward obedience, submission, and external authority. Some scholars point out that this shift mirrors political changes within the Roman Empire. A message that liberates the individual is harder to control. A message that places divine power outside of the individual is easier to manage. If Jesus' final words contained a reminder of our inner divinity, it is no surprise they were replaced with phrases easier to institutionalize. And yet, fragments of the original symbolism survived in hidden teachings, whispered traditions, and the writings discovered at Nag Hammadi. Before we go further, reflect for a moment. Do you believe Jesus, in his final moments, would choose ordinary words? Or would he leave a message that summarized his entire mission? A message capable of freeing every soul from fear and illusion. If symbols were his language, perhaps his final 3 words were not meant to be read with the mind alone, but with the inner eye. Tell me in the comments, what kind of final message do you feel Jesus would choose? Something comforting? Something powerful? Something transformative? If Jesus truly left behind a final message capable of breaking the Archons' control, then we must confront a difficult yet essential question. Who would have wanted that message hidden? History shows that the earliest followers of Jesus were not a unified group. They were diverse, scattered communities with different teachings, different memories, and different interpretations. Some groups emphasized inner awakening, personal revelation, and spiritual independence. These were the communities later labeled Gnostic. Others emphasized structure, authority, and obedience. These became the foundations of traditional Christianity. As the Roman Empire began absorbing and shaping Christian belief, the teachings that empowered individuals became threats, while teachings that strengthened the institution became preferred. But according to Gnostic writings, this process was not merely political, it was spiritual. The Archons, they said, worked through systems, institutions, and fear to keep humanity trapped in limited understanding. Imagine the world through the eyes of early church leaders. They faced persecution, division, and a rapidly growing movement they could barely control. A message that encouraged believers to seek God within themselves was unpredictable. It made people independent, self-guided, less reliant on external authority. But a message that positioned salvation as something granted from the outside through rituals, leaders, and institutions created stability. For political and religious unity, it was more convenient to simplify Jesus' teachings, remove mystical elements, and eliminate anything that suggested humans had direct access to the divine. Over time, the Gnostic writings were suppressed, burned, or buried. Their teachings about the Archons were dismissed as fantasy, and their interpretations of Jesus' final message were erased from mainstream memory. Some scholars argue that this shift wasn't purely intentional wrongdoing. They believe leaders acted out of fear, confusion, or the need for unity. But the Gnostics saw it differently. They believed human institutions were influenced by spiritual forces that benefited from ignorance. In their view, the Archons manipulated fear, chaos, and ambition to distort the message of Jesus into something safer, smaller, and more controllable. If Jesus' final 3 words revealed that the soul could transcend the material cage built by the demiurge, then hiding that truth would be a priority. After all, a humanity without fear cannot be controlled. A humanity that remembers its divine origin cannot be manipulated. A humanity awakened cannot be ruled by illusion. What is even more striking is that ancient bishops themselves admitted that certain teachings of Jesus were too difficult, or too mystical, for the masses. These teachings were set aside, labeled symbolic, or dismissed entirely. But the Gnostics insisted that Jesus taught deeper truths privately to his closest disciples, truths meant for those ready to awaken. These hidden teachings were not meant to create an elite group. They were meant to preserve knowledge from forces that would attempt to destroy it. Over centuries, the version of Jesus that survived was inspirational, but incomplete, beautiful, but limited, powerful, but stripped of the mystical force that terrified the Archons. And here lies the heart of the problem. If Jesus' last 3 words were encoded with spiritual meaning, a condensed formula for awakening, then the simplest way to disarm that formula would be to replace it with a different phrase. Not by erasing his message entirely, but by substituting it with one that fit institutional goals, political stability, and doctrinal clarity. The original spiritual code would be buried under layers of interpretation until its true power faded from memory. But traces remain, hidden in forgotten gospels, symbolic expressions, and the quiet echoes preserved by Gnostic communities. Now reflect on this. Do you think the world today would look the same if humanity had understood Jesus' deepest message for the last 2,000 years? Would fear, division, and spiritual confusion still dominate? Or would we live in a world where individuals recognized their divine spark and could no longer be manipulated by systems of power? Share your thoughts in the comments. Your insight might help others awaken to what has been forgotten. If we follow the trail left across ancient texts, symbolic teachings, and suppressed traditions, a pattern begins to form, a pattern pointing toward a single central revelation. The Gnostics believed Jesus' mission was not only to teach love and compassion, but to expose the illusion that imprisons the soul. They insisted that Jesus spoke in paradoxes and symbols because the deepest truths cannot be conveyed with ordinary language. And they believed that his final moments were not a surrender to death, but a final act of spiritual defiance against the Archons. According to their writings, Jesus did not die defeated. He died awakened, conscious, and fully aware that his death was not an end but a doorway. If his last 3 words carried a secret, then they were not meant to describe his suffering. They were meant to describe our liberation. To uncover this forgotten revelation, we must understand a key theme that runs through all Gnostic teachings, the concept of remembering. Over and over, Jesus tells his disciples that their true nature has been forgotten, not lost, forgotten. He tells them the kingdom's within. He tells them they were with the Father before the world existed. He tells them the soul has a divine origin that the material realm tries to conceal. And he tells them that fear is the weapon of the Archons, the very thing that keeps us blind. So imagine Jesus, suspended between life and death, looking at a world manipulated by illusion, and choosing to leave behind a final message that cuts through all fear. Would he not choose words that remind humanity of what the Archons cannot touch? Consider also the symbolic power of his final breath. Breath, in ancient teachings, represents spirit, life force, consciousness. In Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, the words for breath and spirit are intertwined. So a final whisper from Jesus was not merely physical, it was spiritual. Just as he used parables to hide deeper truths from those who would distort them, he may have used his last breath to encode a message meant only for those who seek. Some scholars believe his final phrase referred to completion or fulfillment. Others argue it was a declaration of victory. But when we read these interpretations through a Gnostic lens, something extraordinary emerges. Jesus may have been declaring that the illusion had been broken, that the cycle of fear had been exposed, that the Archons no longer held power over the awakened soul. This is where the turning point becomes clear. In several Gnostic writings, Jesus reveals that the greatest secret of spiritual liberation is not external salvation, but internal recognition, the awakening of the divine spark. He teaches that once you know who you truly are, the Archons lose their grip. Fear loses its grip. Death loses its grip. So if Jesus truly left a 3-word message, the Gnostics believed it was a reminder of this inner truth, a truth capable of dissolving illusion instantly, a truth the Archons could not allow to spread. Some ancient communities claimed that Jesus' final message was a command, not a statement, a call to awaken, not a resignation, a set of words that reminded humanity of its divine origin. And although these communities vanished, their whispers survived, that Jesus' last breath was not saying, "It is finished," but something far more revolutionary, something that placed power back into the hands of every soul willing to seek the truth. Now pause for a moment and reflect. If Jesus left a message designed to free you, personally, from fear and illusion, what would you want those words to be? What would you hope he whispered in that final sacred moment? Share your intuition in the comments. Your insight may align with the ancient revelation we are about to uncover. If Jesus' final 3 words were truly a spiritual code, a message designed to break fear, illusion, and the influence of the Archons, then this revelation is not meant to stay in the past. It is meant for you right now, in the world you live in, with the challenges you face and the thoughts you struggle with. The Gnostics taught that knowledge is not power until it becomes transformation. And transformation begins when we see our lives not as isolated suffering, but as part of a cosmic story where the soul is far greater than anything the material world can impose. Jesus' teachings consistently pointed to this truth. The divine spark inside you has always been stronger than the forces that try to control you. If his final 3 words were meant to awaken this spark, then they were meant to show you that you are not powerless. You are remembering. Think about how many times in your life you have felt trapped by circumstances, fear, guilt, or expectations. These emotional prisons are the modern tools of the Archons. They whisper doubt, they weaken self-worth, they bury intuition, and they convince you that you are small. But the forgotten message of Jesus tells you the opposite. It tells you that you are not a creation of the demiurge, destined to obey and suffer. You are a child of the source, carrying the same divine light that Jesus came to reveal. When you understand this, the illusions that once held you begin to fall away. Fear becomes weaker. Manipulation loses its impact. The opinions of others no longer define your path. And the systems that rely on your ignorance begin to lose control over your consciousness. This is why the Archons feared those final 3 words. Because once someone remembers their divine origin, they become impossible to control. They begin to question the structures around them. They begin to recognize lies disguised as truth. They begin to feel an internal clarity that cannot be silenced, even in moments of darkness. The Gnostics believed that Jesus' message was not meant only for the disciples who followed him, but for every soul living in the material world, a reminder echoing through time, waiting for each person to hear it when they were ready. This message is not locked in a book, nor controlled by an institution. It rises in the heart of anyone who questions the illusion and seeks the truth beyond appearances. Look at the world today, the constant pressure to conform, the noise that distracts from inner silence, the fear that divides people, the confusion that keeps humanity spiritually disconnected. These are the same patterns the Gnostics described 2,000 years ago. And Jesus' final message becomes more relevant than ever. It invites you to look inward, to reconnect with your inner light, and to see yourself not as a victim of the world, but as a traveler awakening from a dream. When you remember who you truly are, every challenge becomes part of a larger awakening process. Every obstacle becomes a lesson, and every moment becomes a chance to choose truth over illusion. Before we move to the final block, pause and reflect. What part of your life feels like it has been shaped by fear rather than truth? What illusion have you been carrying about yourself, about your purpose, about your connection to the divine? And how would your life change if you truly believed that Jesus left a message reminding you of your eternal divine origin? Share your answer in the comments. Your reflection may awaken something in someone else watching this video. Now that we have walked through ancient texts, forgotten symbols, and the hidden layers of Jesus' final moments, something becomes unmistakably clear. The true power of his last 3 words was never meant to stay trapped in history. It was meant to awaken the part of you that has always sensed there is more to this world than what you were taught. The Gnostics believed Jesus left a message not just for his disciples, but for every soul living under the weight of illusion, a message capable of reminding you that you come from a divine source, untouched by the Archons, untouched by fear, untouched by the limitations of the material world. Whether those words were whispered in code, preserved symbolically, or hidden in teachings scattered across the Gospels, the essence remains the same. Jesus left humanity a key and the key opens the door to remembrance. When you begin to see your life through this lens, everything changes. Your doubts, your pain, your confusion, none of it means that you are lost. It means you are waking up. The Archons work in shadows, not because they are powerful, but because you are powerful. And the moment you remember your divine origin, their influence begins to crumble. This is why the forgotten message of Jesus matters today more than ever. In a world full of fear, noise, and distraction, his final breath carries the same vibration it carried 2,000 years ago. A call to rise, to see, to remember. A call that begins not outside you, but within your own consciousness. And if you felt something stirring within you as you listened to this video, a recognition, a clarity, a quiet spark returning, then you are already responding to that call. Now, the journey continues with you. Hidden revelations survive only when they are shared, protected, and kept alive by those who seek truth. By liking this video, leaving a comment, and subscribing to the channel, you help ensure that these ancient teachings, long buried, misunderstood, or silenced, continue reaching those who are searching just like you. This is not just an algorithmic action. It is a way of joining a community of seekers who refuse to let these truths vanish again. If something in this message resonated with you, write it below. What part awakened you the most? What question still burns inside you? Your voice becomes part of the very process Jesus began, a ripple expanding across time, helping others remember who they truly are. And now I leave you with a final question, one that each person must answer in their own heart. If Jesus left a message encoded in his last 3 words, and if that message was meant to awaken your soul, what will you do with it? Will you let it fade into the noise of the world, or will you continue the search that he began, the search for the truth behind the illusion? The journey does not end here. It begins now, with your next breath, your next choice, your next revelation. Keep seeking, keep questioning, and above all, keep remembering